The Milwaukee winter carried the particular cruelty reserved for people without options. Maya Torres sat in the emergency room waiting area at 2:47 a.m., watching her twin daughters sleep in wheelchairs positioned side by side like sentinels against a world that had stopped making accommodations. Lucia's head tilted left, mouth open slightly, drool forming at the corner in a way that would have embarrassed her if she were awake. Sofia pressed against her sister, even in sleep, their bodies instinctively seeking the warmth and connection that cerebral palsy made difficult but never diminished. The bill in Maya's hand announced itself with the weight of finality. $8,347 for tonight's emergency visit. Lucia's seizure, her fourth in 6 months, each one more severe than the last. The medication adjustments weren't working. The neurologist, Dr. Patterson, had been gentle but clear during the consultation that followed stabilization. We need to consider hospitalization for comprehensive evaluation. The seizures are escalating. Without proper intervention, the risk increases significantly. How much? Maya's voice had come out smaller than intended, already knowing the answer would exceed what existed in her universe of possible. Insurance would cover 60%. Your portion, conservative estimate, $15,000 to $20,000, plus ongoing medication adjustments, specialist consultations, possible surgical intervention if we identify a focal point. We're discussing $40,000 to $60,000 over the next year. The number had landed like a physical blow. Maya's checking account currently held $287. Her savings, depleted 6 months ago when the car broke down and choosing between repairs or rent had been no choice at all, contained $43. The credit cards maxed out at a combined $23,000, their monthly minimum payments alone consuming money she didn't have. She worked 3 jobs. Morning shift at the bakery, 4 a.m. to 10 a.m., standing on concrete floors that made her ankles swell and her back scream. Afternoon, cleaning houses for families whose children attended schools with art programs and field trips and the kind of casual abundance that felt like science fiction. Evenings doing data entry from the laptop the public library had donated when they learned about her situation, typing until her fingers cramped and her vision blurred, and the twins needed their nighttime routine of medications, stretches, positioning, prayers that tomorrow would be gentler than today. The apartment, if the word could be applied to 400 square feet of modified storage space above a bodega, cost $950 monthly. The landlord, Carlos, had been kind enough to install a ramp after the building inspector had cited him for violations. But kindness had limits. 3 months behind on rent, min eviction, notice taped to the door with the bureaucratic certainty of systems that process people as efficiently as garbage. Maya watched her daughters sleep and perform calculations that never balanced. Monthly income from 3 jobs, $2,840 before taxes, $2,380 after. Rent, $950. Medications for the twins, even with insurance, $340. Food, $400 if she stretched everything and ate primarily whatever the bakery was throwing away. Utilities, $180. The specialized equipment Lucia needed, ankle braces and adaptive utensils and positioning cushions, another $200 monthly, even buying secondhand through Facebook groups for parents of disabled children. Transportation via the paratransit service because regular buses couldn't accommodate 2 wheelchairs and her simultaneously, $150. The math left $160 for everything else. Clothing, emergencies, the 1,000 small costs that accumulated like interest on debt that could never be repaid. The eviction notice demanded $2,850 by Friday, 3 days away, or they'd be on the street. The ER bill wanted payment arrangements immediately. Dr. Patterson's recommendation required money that existed only in parallel universes where cerebral palsy didn't cost everything and single mothers earned enough to survive. Sofia stirred, her left hand curling in the spastic motion that signaled waking. Maya moved immediately, kneeling beside the wheelchair, placing her hand over her daughter's. "It's okay, baby. We're still at the hospital. Lucia's stable. We're going home soon." "How soon?" Sofia's speech came labored, shaped by muscle control that required conscious effort for every syllable. Before school, the question hurt worse than the bills. The twins were 11 years old. They attended Lincoln Elementary through an IEP that provided aid support, modified curriculum, physical therapy during school hours. They loved learning with the fierce intensity of children who understood that education represented their best chance at futures beyond dependence. Missing school meant falling behind. Falling behind meant struggling. Struggling meant watching other kids advance while they remained static. Yeah, before school, Maya manufactured certainty she didn't feel. You'll make it to Mrs. Patterson's class. She's doing that unit on ecosystems you've been excited about. The girls have been excited. Past tense. Before the seizures escalated and the medications increased and the side effects made concentration difficult. Before eviction notices and ER bills and the slow grinding acknowledgement that trying hard wasn't enough when systems demanded more than effort could provide. The discharge paperwork arrived at 4:15 a.m., delivered by a nurse whose exhaustion matched Maya's own. The instructions ran 3 pages. Medication adjustments, warning signs to watch for, follow-up appointments with neurology within 1 week. The prescriptions, handed over with sympathetic expressions that changed nothing, would cost another $180 at the pharmacy. Money that didn't exist. Choices that weren't choices. Which daughter's needs took priority when both required everything. The paratransit van arrived at 5:30 a.m. The driver, Marcus, a man in his 50s who'd seen enough to recognize crisis when it presented itself, helped load both wheelchairs without commenting on Maya's red eyes or shaking hands. He'd been driving these routes for 15 years. He knew the difference between routine medical appointments and emergencies that destroyed what little stability families had built. The ride back to the apartment passed in silence, broken only by the van's engine and the twins' quiet conversation about whether they'd get to see their friends today. Maya stared out the window at Milwaukee's pre-dawn darkness, at streets that looked the same whether you were winning or losing, thriving or drowning. The city didn't care. The bills didn't care. The systems that decided who deserved support and who deserved abandonment didn't care. At 6:15 a.m., Maya got the girls inside, up the ramp that was too steep but legal enough to pass inspection, through the door that stuck because the frame had warped and the landlord hadn't. Fixed it despite promises. The apartment smelled like Carlos's cooking from downstairs, beans and rice and the cilantro that seemed to perfume everything. Small space, made smaller by the equipment necessary for the twins to function. Hospital bed in the corner that Medicaid had provided after the social worker had advocated hard enough. Shower chair in the bathroom that barely fit. Walker frames folded against the wall. Leg braces arranged on shelves like artifact from wars against bodies that didn't cooperate. Maya prepared breakfast with the efficiency of practice. Oatmeal with brown sugar, because it was cheap and filling and soft enough that Sofia could manage it without choking. Pills distributed according to the complex schedule written on the whiteboard. Lucia's anti-seizure medication, increased dose as of last night. Sofia's muscle relaxant that helped with spasticity but made her drowsy. Supplements the neurologist recommended, but insurance didn't cover, purchased when money existed, skipped when it didn't. The morning routine took 90 minutes. Feeding, medications, dressing in adaptive clothing with Velcro instead of buttons because fine motor control was fantasy. Brushing teeth while supporting weight because standing independently wasn't possible. Hair combed and braided because the girls wanted to look like the other kids, wanted normalcy in whatever form it could be claimed. By 7:45 a.m., they were ready. Maya called the school to arrange transportation, confirmed the aide would meet them, promised yes. Lucia was stable despite the ER visit. Yes, she'd send updated medication information. Yes, she understood they needed documentation of any medical changes that might affect school participation. The aide, Jennifer, arrived at 8:10 a.m. in the district van. She was 23 years old, just out of college with an education degree and the optimism of someone who believes systems worked if you followed procedures correctly. She helped transfer the twins, secured their wheelchairs, asked Maya if she was okay with the kind of concern that came from genuine caring but changed nothing. "I'm fine, just tired." Maya delivered the lie with the practice of years. They had a good night. Jennifer knew it wasn't true. The text from the school nurse documenting the ER visit had already circulated through the special education department. But acknowledging crisis meant paperwork and interventions and CPS involvement that helped sometimes and destroyed other times. Easier to accept the fiction that everything was manageable if everyone just tried hard enough. After they left, Maya stood in the empty apartment and let herself break for exactly 5 minutes. Crying that came from someplace deeper than sadness, rage and exhaustion, and the terrible knowledge that loving her daughters desperately didn't translate into ability to provide what they needed. At 8:20 a.m., she stopped, washed her face, changed into the bakery uniform that smelled like yeast and commercial disinfectant, walked 3 blocks to work because the paratransit van didn't serve able-bodied adults and the bus required money for fare. The bakery shift passed in mechanical repetition, mixing dough, shaping loaves, loading ovens, cleaning equipment. The owner, Mrs. Chun, was kind in the way small business owners could be when kindness didn't cost money. She let Maya take home day-old bread and pastries that would otherwise be thrown away. She didn't comment when Maya ate lunch in the back room, consuming food faster than hunger justified because she didn't know when the next meal would happen. At 10:15 a.m., during her break, Maya checked her phone and found the email that rewrote everything she thought she understood about her family's history. The subject line read, "Legal notification regarding estate of Dr. Helena Ruiz Torres." The sender was Baxter and Associates, attorneys at law, Truth or Consequences, New Mexico. The message opened with the formal language of legal proceedings, words arranged to convey information while maintaining emotional distance from implications. "Dear Ms. Maya Elena Torres, we are writing to inform you of matters concerning the estate of Dr. Helena Ruiz Torres, deceased January 3rd of this year. According to genealogical research conducted during estate settlement, you have been identified as Dr. Torres's sole surviving relative and legal heir to her property and assets. Dr. Torres was a prominent biochemist and pharmaceutical researcher who conducted private research from her facility in Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, from 1978 until her death at age 89. Her estate includes a 12-acre property containing a main residence and research laboratory complex. This property and all contents therein are now legally yours per inheritance laws and Dr. Torres's intestate succession. Please contact our office to discuss transfer procedures and legal requirements for claiming your inheritance. Time-sensitive decisions regarding property maintenance and asset preservation require your immediate attention." Maya read the email 3 times, convinced she'd misunderstood or that this was sophisticated fraud targeting desperate people who'd believe anything promising rescue. She'd never heard of Helena Ruiz Torres. Her family history was fragmented at best, catastrophic at worst. Her father had left when she was 3. Her mother had died of cancer when Maya was 19, taking with her any stories about relatives who might have existed beyond the immediate disasters of their nuclear family. But the law firm was real. 5 minutes of Googling confirmed Baxter and Associates had been operating in Truth or Consequences for 40 years. The address existed. The phone number connected to a receptionist who confirmed yes, they'd sent the email. Yes, Mr. Baxter could speak with her during business hours. Yes, this concerned an actual inheritance, not a scam. The rest of her bakery shift passed in a fog. Maya's hands performed their tasks while her mind spiraled through possibilities and impossibilities in equal measure. A grandmother she'd never known. A researcher, whatever that meant. Property in New Mexico, a state she'd never visited and couldn't locate precisely on a map without checking her phone. An inheritance that might be valuable or might be worthless ruins generating property taxes she couldn't afford. Her phone buzzed at 1:30 p.m. Text from Jennifer, the aide. Lucia had another small seizure during math class. Minor, controlled with medication, but the school nurse wanted to discuss emergency planning and whether Lucia should be sent home early as a precaution. Maya called immediately. The conversation with Nurse Morrison lasted 15 minutes and covered territory now familiar through repetition. Yes, Lucia's seizures were escalating. Yes, they were seeking additional medical evaluation. Yes, Maya understood the school's concerns about liability and student safety. No, she couldn't provide 24-hour monitoring at home because she worked 3 jobs. Yes, she understood that wasn't ideal. No, she didn't have family who could help. Keep her there, Maya finally decided. The monitoring at school is better than what I can provide at home alone. If it gets worse, call me immediately and I'll come. After hanging up, she stood outside the bakery and performed calculations that had become second nature. She had the cleaning job from 2 p.m. to 6 p.m. 4 houses, $100 total, money she desperately needed. But if Lucia's condition deteriorated, if the school called, if emergency services were required, if, the variables multiplied faster than solutions appeared. She wanted the cleaning job because she had to. The first house belonged to the Andersons, a couple in their 40s with 3 children and enough disposable income that they hired someone to clean rather than doing it themselves. Maya scrubbed bathrooms and mopped floors and vacuumed carpets while their daughter's piano practice echoed through the house. Chopin, if she remembered correctly from the music appreciation course she'd taken before pregnancy and cerebral palsy and single motherhood, had rewritten her entire life's trajectory. The second house was the Patels. Mrs. Patel always left $20 on the counter with a note saying thank you, which was kind even though it felt like charity. Maya took the money without shame because shame was a luxury for people whose children weren't seizing multiple times monthly and whose bank accounts contained more than triple digits. At 4:15 p.m., her phone rang. School number. Maya's heart rate spiked immediately, hands going cold, breath catching. She answered on the second ring. Ms. Torres, this is Nurse Morrison. Lucia is stable, but she's had 2 more small seizures this afternoon. Dr. Patterson's office recommends you bring her to the hospital for evaluation. They're concerned about status epilepticus if the seizures continue clustering. Maya closed her eyes. Status epilepticus. Continuous seizure activity. Medical emergency. Hospital admission. Bills that would dwarf the $8,347 from last night. Bills that would ensure homelessness even if she worked 6 jobs instead of 3. I'll come get her. Give me 20 minutes. The drive to the school, borrowed car from her neighbor Teresa, who understood single motherhood's mathematics even without the added complications of disability, took 15 minutes through afternoon traffic. Maya's mind ran numbers compulsively. Hospital admission. Conservative estimate $30,000 to $50,000 after insurance. Medications $500 to $800. Follow-up care unknown. Meanwhile, rent unpaid. Utilities threatening disconnection. Food budget already stretched to transparency. Lucia looked small in her wheelchair, flanked by Jennifer and Nurse Morrison in the school office. Her eyes tracked movement, awareness present but dulled by medication and exhaustion. Maya knelt beside her, checking pupils and muscle tone with the practiced assessment of a mother who'd become de facto medical coordinator. Hi, baby. We're going to the hospital to make sure everything's okay. Lucia's response came slurred. Don't want to. Tired of hospitals. I know. Me too. But we need to keep you safe. Sofia sat nearby, her expression combining fear for her sister with the complicated guilt of the healthy sibling who couldn't help. Can I come? Not this time. Jennifer's going to take you home, and Mrs. Chun from the bakery will check on you. I'll call every hour. Promise. The hospital admission went faster this time, ER staff recognizing them from the previous night, pulling records, fast-tracking the process. Dr. Patterson appeared at 6:45 p.m., reviewed Lucia's vitals, explained the plan with the compassion of someone who genuinely cared but operated within a system that made caring expensive. We need to admit her for observation and comprehensive monitoring. 3 to 5 days minimum. We'll run continuous EEG, adjust medications under supervision, possibly image the brain again to rule out structural changes. This gives us the best chance of controlling the seizures long-term. And the cost? Maya already knew, but needed to hear it confirmed. Dr. Patterson hesitated, recognizing the trap. Medical need versus financial catastrophe. Both real, both urgent, both inescapable. Talk to the financial counselors. They can help with payment plans, charity care applications. Sometimes funds exist for exceptional hardship cases. The financial counselor appeared at 8:30 p.m. Her name was Linda, mid-50s, with the efficient kindness of someone who delivered bad news professionally. She reviewed Maya's income, expenses, existing debt with the thoroughness of an accountant performing audit. Her final assessment came with genuine regret, but no solutions. You qualify for some charity care reduction, maybe 30 to 40% of the bill. The rest you'd need to arrange payment plans. But Ms. Torres, I'll be honest. With your current financial situation and the eviction notice you mentioned, adding this debt means bankruptcy is likely. Have you considered that option? Bankruptcy. The word landed like diagnosis of terminal illness. 7 years of ruined credit, inability to rent apartments or secure loans or demonstrate financial responsibility to systems that judged worth by credit scores. 7 years of explaining to landlords and employers and institutions why she'd failed at the basic requirement of paying what she owed. I'll figure something out. Maya's response was automatic, meaningless. The thing you said when giving up wasn't possible because children depended on you. That night, with Lucia admitted to the pediatric unit and hooked to monitors that beeped gentle reassurance of continued existence, Maya sat in the parents' sleep room and opened the email about Helena Ruiz Torres again. She clicked the attached documents. Property deed, registered 1978. Research laboratory permit issued 1979. Tax records showing property value assessed at $340,000, though the records noted the structures were classified as severely deteriorated, uninhabitable, as of the last assessment in 2018. She called the law firm at 9:47 p.m., knowing it was after hours, but desperate enough to try. Voicemail. She left a message with callback information and a request for urgent consultation. The response came at 6:15 a.m. the next morning while Maya sat beside Lucia's hospital bed, watching her daughter sleep under the influence of medication strong enough to suppress seizures but also suppress most conscious function. The lawyer, Robert Baxter, had a voice that suggested decades of practice delivering news, both good and bad, with equal measure of professional distance. Ms. Torres, I received your message. I understand you have questions about the inheritance. Let me be direct, because I suspect your situation doesn't allow for extended deliberation. The property in truth or consequences includes 12 acres, a main residence approximately 3,200 square feet, and a laboratory complex approximately 6,400 square feet. Dr. Torres lived reclusively and conducted private research. The structures are old, in poor condition, haven't been maintained since her health failed around 2015. Is there value? Maya's question cut through his explanation. I need to know if this is something real or just more burden I can't handle. Baxter paused, measuring his words. The land alone is worth approximately $180,000 to $220,000 in current market. The structures add value if they can be rehabilitated, subtract value if they require demolition. Dr. Torres kept the property taxes paid through automatic withdrawal from her pension, so there's no immediate debt, but maintenance and security are concerns. The property has been vandalized twice in the past year, and I've received inquiries from Southwestern Properties about purchasing it for development. How much are they offering? Maya already knew she was going to New Mexico. Already knew this was the only option that wasn't slow catastrophe. But she needed to understand what she was accepting or refusing. $275,000. It's a fair offer given the property's condition. You'd walk away with money after closing costs and my fees. Roughly $250,000 net. That would solve immediate financial problems for you. But there's always a but. But Dr. Torres's research might have value beyond real estate. She was a pharmaceutical biochemist specializing in neurological compounds. Patents, research data, laboratory equipment, these could potentially be worth more than the land. However, assessing that requires expertise I don't have and time you might not want to invest. The development company want an answer within 30 days or they withdraw their offer. Maya looked at Lucia, sleeping amid machines that kept her alive and stable. She thought about Sofia at home with Mrs. Chun, missing her sister and her mother simultaneously. She thought about the eviction notice and the ER bills and the 3 jobs that paid just enough to drown slowly instead of quickly. I need to see it. The property. I need to know what I'm deciding about. Baxter's response came with what might have been approval. That's wise. I'll arrange access and send you keys and directions. But Ms. Torres, understand that traveling from Milwaukee to New Mexico with your daughter's medical needs is expensive and complicated. Are you certain? Maya wasn't certain of anything except that staying meant accepting defeat and leaving meant gambling on possibility. And between certain catastrophe and uncertain hope, hope was the only rational choice. I'll be there in 4 days. After hanging up, she sat with Lucia until Dr. Patterson made morning rounds at 7:30 a.m. The news was guardedly optimistic. The medication adjustments seemed to be working. If Lucia remained stable for 48 hours, discharge would be possible with intensive outpatient monitoring. But the doctor's caveat made clear that stable meant controlled, not cured. The seizures would return. The costs would continue. The slow, grinding mathematics of medical crisis and financial collapse would resume unless something changed fundamentally. Maya called her job from the hospital cafeteria at 8 a.m., told Mrs. Chun at the bakery that she needed 2 weeks. Mrs. Chun, bless her, didn't ask questions, just said positions will be held and take care of your daughters. The cleaning service was less understanding. 2 weeks' notice meant losing the contract. For families she'd worked for, gone. $400 weekly income evaporated. But keeping those jobs meant staying in Milwaukee, meant accepting that the current trajectory led only toward homelessness and CPS involvement, and the twins being placed in foster care because systems decided overwhelmed mothers who loved desperately were less suitable parents than strangers who had resources. The data entry company, working through a contractor who existed primarily as email address and direct deposit, simply stopped sending assignments after she explained she'd be unavailable. No explanation, no argument, just silence that meant she'd been replaced by someone more available. By 8:45 a.m., Maya had lost 2 of her 3 income sources, committed to abandoning the third, and had no plan beyond driving to New Mexico to look at property she'd inherited from a grandmother she'd never known existed until 24 hours ago. She called her mother's sister, Aunt Claudia, a woman who'd maintained minimal contact for years because family ties frayed under the weight of judgment and disapproval. Claudia lived in Phoenix, close enough to New Mexico to potentially offer information, far enough that she'd successfully avoided involvement in Maya's struggles. The conversation started with surprise that Maya had called after 3 years of silence, progressed through polite questions about the twins, then shifted when Maya mentioned Helena Ruiz Torres. Claudia's voice changed, tightening with something between anger and old grief. Your mother never talked about her. Helena was her mother, but they'd been estranged since before you were born. Something about Helena choosing her research over family, over basic human connection. She was brilliant, your mother said. Absolutely brilliant. And absolutely cold. She sent money occasionally, but never visited, never called. When your mother got sick, Helena didn't come to the funeral. I didn't even know she died until you just told me. Did Mom ever mention what kind of research Helena did? Something with brain chemistry, medications. Your mother said Helena was trying to cure neurological conditions, that it was personal obsession after her husband, your grandfather, died of early-onset Alzheimer's in his 40s. But that's all I know. We didn't talk about Helena. That wound was too deep. After the call, Maya sat with new information that recontextualized everything. Helena had been researching neurological conditions. Her daughters had cerebral palsy, a neurological condition. The laboratory complex, the research. What if there was something there, some treatment, some hope beyond the standard medications that controlled symptoms without addressing the fundamental problem? The thought was dangerous. Hope was dangerous. Hope meant risking the certain money from the development company against the possibility of something better. And possibility had a way of transforming into disappointment when desperation drove decision-making. But what if? The question haunted Maya through the next 48 hours as Lucia stabilized and discharge planning began. What if Helena's research contained value? What if the laboratory held equipment or data or patents worth more than $275,000? What if this inheritance was exactly what it appeared to be? An answer arriving decades late to prayers Maya's mother had stopped praying. She researched pharmaceutical patents, learned that successful neurological drugs generated billions. She found Helena's name on 3 patents filed in the 1980s, all related to neural pathway modification compounds. The patents had expired, but they proved Helena hadn't just been conducting amateur experiments. She'd been working at professional level, producing results recognized by the U.S. Patent Office. Maya called Baxter again on day 3, asked about the laboratory's contents. He explained that per Helena's will-equivalent paperwork, everything on the property belonged to the heir. Research notes, equipment, compounds, data, all of it Maya's to assess, keep, sell, or destroy as she determined. Is there security? Is it safe? I mean, if there's valuable equipment or research, has anyone tried to steal it? Baxter's pause suggested careful consideration of how to phrase bad news. The property has been broken into twice, as I mentioned. Sheriff's Department responded both times. Nothing appeared to be taken, but the laboratory door was forced open. It's possible people were searching for valuable equipment or drugs, or possibly Southwestern Properties conducting unauthorized assessment of the structures. They've been aggressive about wanting to purchase the land for development. Building a resort community in truth or consequences has been their focus for 5 years. Maya made her decision during that call. She would go to New Mexico. She would take the twins because leaving them meant trusting others with their care, and trust was a luxury she couldn't afford. She would look at the laboratory, assess its contents, and determine whether grandmother she'd never known had left her the tools to save daughters she'd never met. The logistics consumed the next day. Teresa, her neighbor, agreed to drive them to New Mexico in exchange for $300 gas money Maya didn't have but borrowed from Mrs. Chun against future wages. The borrowed car, a 1998 Honda Odyssey that Teresa had purchased specifically because it could accommodate wheelchairs, became their transportation. Teresa was 52, Mexican immigrant, mother of 4 grown children, and the kind of neighbor who showed up during crisis without being asked. They loaded the van at 4 a.m. on day 4. Both wheelchairs secured. Medications packed in coolers with ice packs. Medical equipment that couldn't be left behind filled the cargo space. Clothing minimal because everything was minimal. The twins, confused but trusting, asked questions Maya answered with optimism she manufactured through a rather than belief. Where are we going? Sofia's question came while Maya was helping her into the van, transferring weight, positioning body, securing seatbelt around a frame that couldn't support itself independently. New Mexico, to see a house that belonged to your great-grandmother. She was a scientist. What kind of scientist? Lucia's interest sparked despite exhaustion. The kind who try to fix brains that don't work right. Maya delivered the explanation with care, aware she was setting expectations that might shatter. Maybe she left us something that can help with your seizures, with the CP. Maybe not, but we need to see. Teresa started driving at 4:30 a.m., heading south out of Milwaukee toward highways that would carry them 1,400 miles through America's middle. The twins slept most of the first day, medication and exhaustion combining into unconsciousness that mimicked peace. Maya sat in the passenger seat and tried not to calculate the risk she was taking. She'd lost 2 jobs, abandoned her apartment, effectively, though the eviction would formalize within days. Spent her last money on gasoline for a trip that might reveal nothing except ruins and broken dreams. If the property was worthless, if the laboratory contained nothing valuable, she'd be stranded in New Mexico with 2 daughters, no income, no housing, and no plan. But if she'd stayed in Milwaukee? Eviction certain. Medical bills overwhelming. CPS involvement probable once homelessness became official. The risk of going felt marginally smaller than the certainty of staying. They drove through Illinois, Missouri, Oklahoma, Texas, stopping every few hours to stretch, reposition, handle bathroom needs that required Hoyer lifts and careful maneuvering. Teresa drove with the competent patience of someone who'd spent decades navigating difficult circumstances without complaint. They slept in parking lots at rest stops. Teresa reclined in the driver's seat while Maya kept watching back with the twins. On the second day, crossing into New Mexico, Sofia asked the question that had been building since Milwaukee. "Mama, what if there's nothing there? What if it's just broken buildings?" Maya considered lying, offering false certainty that would comfort temporarily. But her daughters deserved truth even when truth hurt. Then we figure out what comes next. Same as always. We keep going because that's what we do. But where will we keep going to? Lucia's question cut deeper because it acknowledged the reality Maya had been avoiding. We don't have anywhere to keep going to. Teresa glanced in the rearview mirror, catching Maya's eye. We figure out together. Family helps family. You're not alone. The promise felt both comforting and inadequate. Teresa had her own life, her own struggles. She couldn't adopt another family's catastrophe indefinitely. But for now, in this moment, driving through New Mexico desert toward an inheritance that promised everything or nothing, the words mattered. They reached truth or consequences at 3:30 p.m. on the second day. Population 6,000, built around hot springs and fading tourism. The kind of town that had seen better days and maintained itself through stubbornness rather than prosperity. The landscape was all exposed earth and sparse vegetation, sky huge and blue in a way that made Milwaukee's gray claustrophobia feel like distant memory. Baxter's office occupied a single-story building on the main street, across from a pharmacy and a diner advertising world-famous green chili. They parked, and Maya went inside alone, leaving Teresa with the twins, needing to have this conversation without audience or dependent parties. Robert Baxter was 67, silver-haired, wearing a BOLO tie and cowboy boots that suggested he'd gone native decades ago, despite the Boston accent that occasionally surfaced. He shook Maya's hand with a grip that assessed strength, found adequate reserves, and proceeded accordingly. "Ms. Torres, I'm glad you came. Let me be direct. Southwestern Properties called again this morning. They're willing to increase their offer to $300,000 if you sign within 72 hours. That's $25,000 more than their previous offer, and it suggests they're motivated. I'd recommend accepting." Maya sat in the leather chair across from his desk and felt the weight of choice pressing down like physical force. "Before I decide, I need to see the property. Need to understand what I'd be selling." Baxter nodded, having expected this. "I could drive you there now if you'd like. It's 20 minutes outside town, but I want you to understand what you'll find. The main house is structurally unsound in places. The laboratory building is locked, and I don't have keys to the interior rooms. Dr. Torres was paranoid about security in her final years. The grounds are overgrown. This isn't some hidden gem waiting to be discovered. This is abandoned property that's been deteriorating for a decade. I still need to see it." He stood, retrieving keys from a lockbox. "Let's go." The drive took them east from truth or consequences along a two-lane highway that gradually degraded from maintained pavement to questionable asphalt to something barely distinguishable from the desert it cut through. Baxter drove his Silverado with the casual confidence of someone who'd navigated these roads for decades, while Teresa followed in the Honda with the twins. Maya sat in the passenger seat, watching landscape that looked simultaneously ancient and temporary, like everything here existed at the pleasure of forces that could erase it without effort. Baxter broke the silence with information delivered in the measured tone of someone who'd rehearsed this speech. Dr. Torres purchased this land in 1977, right after her husband died. She was 45 years old, already an established researcher, but something about his death changed her trajectory. She quit her position at a pharmaceutical company in California, took her savings and his life insurance, and built this facility specifically to pursue research the company wouldn't fund. Too experimental, they said. Too focused on long-shot neurological repair rather than symptom management. What is she trying to do? Maya watched the desert scroll past, trying to imagine her grandmother out here alone, building something from nothing. Fix brains. Specifically, repair neural pathways damaged by degenerative diseases, trauma, developmental conditions. She believed that if you could identify the specific molecular barriers preventing neural regeneration and target them with the right compounds, you could restore function. It was revolutionary thinking in the 1970s. Hell, it's still revolutionary now. But she couldn't get funding because the pharmaceutical model is built on managing chronic conditions, not curing them. Cured patients don't buy medications for life. Did she succeed? The question came out smaller than Maya intended. Hope and fear combining into something that felt like prayer. Baxter's expression suggested he'd been waiting for this. I don't know. She published some papers in the early 80s that got attention, filed those patents I mentioned. But then she went dark. Stopped publishing, stopped attending conferences, stopped communicating with former colleagues. The rumor was that she'd either made a breakthrough she was protecting or had failed completely and couldn't admit it. She lived out here alone for 40 years, conducting research no one saw, talking to almost no one. When she died, the only reason I was notified is because she'd listed me as her attorney for property tax purposes decades ago. They turned onto a dirt road marked only by a sun-faded sign reading private property, no trespassing. The road climbed gradually through scrubland dotted with creosote and mesquite. After 2 miles, the property appeared like a mirage, structures rising from desert floor with the defiant verticality of things built to withstand. The main house stood 3 stories tall, narrow, and severe, constructed from adobe and concrete in a style that prioritized function over aesthetics. Windows were small and high, positioned to minimize heat gain. The walls, thick enough to provide thermal mass, showed cracks but no collapse. The roof, flat in the southwestern style, bore evidence of repeated patching with materials that didn't quite match. Beside it, set back 50 yards, the laboratory complex spread low and long. Single-story, reinforced construction, few windows, multiple additions that have been built over decades without concern for architectural harmony. The original structure looked professional, purpose-built. The additions looked improvised, expanded as need demanded and resources allowed. The ground surrounding both buildings had surrendered to desert reclamation. Equipment rusted among the sage. Chain-link fencing leaned at angles that suggested wind and time had collaborated toward collapse. But the buildings themselves stood, damaged but defiant, waiting. Teresa pulled up beside them and helped the twins out. Sofia and Lucia stared at the structures with expressions combining fascination and apprehension. Maya felt something similar rise in her chest. This was real. Helena had been real. The inheritance wasn't paperwork abstraction, but physical place, tangible history. Grandmother's legacy made manifest in adobe and concrete. Baxter led them to the main house first, unlocking the heavy door with keys that showed signs of recent manufacture. Sheriff's Department had to replace the locks after the break-ins. Original keys were lost years ago. Inside smelled of dust and abandonment, and something chemical Maya couldn't identify. The first floor revealed living space arranged with utilitarian precision. Kitchen with commercial-grade equipment, mostly intact but coated in grime. Living area with furniture covered in sheets. Office space with filing cabinets and a desk buried under papers yellowed by time and neglect. The second floor held bedrooms, sparsely furnished, beds made with hospital corners that had held their shape for years. The third floor was entirely dedicated to what appeared to be a library and study. Bookshelves covered every wall, filled with medical texts, research journals, bound notebooks with dates written on their spines. 1978, 1983, 1991, 2003, 2014. Decades of documentation preserved in handwriting that grew shakier with passing years but never stopped. Lucia wheeled closer to the shelves, reaching for one of the notebooks. Maya moved to stop her, uncertain about touching things that might be fragile, but Baxter waved permission. It's all yours. You can touch whatever you want. You own everything here. Maya pulled down the notebook, dated 1978, opened to the first page, and found her grandmother's voice speaking across 4 decades. January 15th, 1978. Project Neural Regeneration, Day 1. Robert died 3 months ago from a disease that stole his mind before it took his body. Watching Alzheimer's destroy the man I loved showed me that our understanding of neural degeneration is catastrophically inadequate. The pharmaceutical industry treats symptoms because curing conditions eliminates profit streams. I'm done participating in that system. This laboratory will pursue what they won't fund: actual repair of damaged neural tissue. If I succeed, I'll give it away. If I fail, at least I'll fail trying to heal rather than profiting from suffering. The words hit Maya with unexpected force. Helena hadn't been cold or distant. She'd been driven by grief and purpose that transcended conventional success. She'd walked away from everything comfortable to chase possibility in the desert. Maya read further, page after page of detailed observations, experimental protocols, molecular analyses. The work was technical beyond her understanding, full of terminology she couldn't parse. But the determination underneath was clear. Helena had been systematically testing compounds, observing their effects on neural tissue cultures, documenting everything with scientific rigor. Teresa appeared at her shoulder, reading over her arm. Your grandmother was serious about this. This isn't amateur work. This is professional research conducted with real methodology. They spent an hour in the library, pulling notebooks at random, finding decades of documentation. The early years showed excitement and rapid progress. By the mid-1980s, the tone shifted to frustrated persistence. Compounds showing promise in cultures failed in animal trials. Funding ran out. Equipment broke and couldn't be replaced. But Helena kept working, adapting, finding ways to continue with diminishing resources. The notebooks from the 2000s revealed a shift. Helena had moved from broad neural regeneration toward specific focus on cerebral palsy and developmental neural damage. The entries referenced a breakthrough in 2008, a compound designated NR47 that showed unprecedented neural pathway formation in damaged tissue models. The excitement in those pages was palpable even through scientific language. But then the entries became sporadic. 2010, only a dozen pages. 2012, half a notebook. 2015, the final entry read simply: eyesight failing. Hands too unsteady for lab work. NR47 synthesis protocol documented in full in Laboratory Archive Room 3. God forgive me if I'm wrong, but I believe it works. No one left to tell. No one would believe me anyway. Perhaps someday someone will find this and finish what I couldn't. Maya looked up at Baxter. Room 3. The laboratory. Can we access it? That's where we run into problems. The laboratory building has multiple interior rooms, all locked with electronic keypads. The power's been off for years, so the electronic locks are frozen. We need a force entry, which risks damaging whatever's inside. Sofia, who'd been quietly examining the notebooks, spoke up. Maybe there's emergency access. Scientists always have backup systems in case power fails, especially someone paranoid about security. Baxter looked at the 11-year-old girl with new appreciation. That's actually excellent thinking. Let's check the laboratory. They moved outside, the New Mexico afternoon sun intense enough that Maya felt it through her jacket. The laboratory building's main entrance required a key Baxter had, but beyond it, a corridor stretched into darkness, broken only by emergency lighting that somehow still functioned. Dim LEDs running on backup batteries that had outlasted their expected lifespan. The corridor walls were concrete, industrial, marked with signs indicating different sections. Tissue culture, Room 1, chemical analysis, Room 2, synthesis and storage, Room 3, animal testing, Room 4, data archive, Room 5. Each door bore an electronic keypad, dark and useless without power. Teresa examined the doors systematically, testing handles, checking frames. These are serious security doors. Commercial grade. You're not forcing these without heavy equipment and a lot of noise. Lucia had wheeled to the end of the corridor where a 6th door stood unmarked. "Mama, this one's different." Maya joined her daughter and saw what Lucia had noticed. Unlike the other doors with their electronic keypads, this one had a simple mechanical lock. Old-fashioned, requiring a physical key. Maya tried the keys Baxter had provided. None worked. The lock was different, smaller, older. She examined the door frame more carefully and found words etched into the concrete, nearly invisible unless you knew to look. "For family, if I fail." Key where family begins. Where family begins. Maya turned the phrase over, trying to decode meaning across decades and the gulf of never having known Helena. Where does family begin? Birth? Marriage? The house? Sofia's voice came quiet. The bedroom. Where you're born. Where conceived. Family begins in bedrooms. They returned to the main house, climbing stairs to the second floor where bedrooms waited. 3 rooms total. Maya entered each systematically, searching for hiding places. The first bedroom yielded nothing. The second, clearly Helena's from the personal items on the dresser, contained a jewelry box with costume pieces worth nothing. But in the third bedroom, smaller than the others, furnished with a child's bed and toys from the 1950s, Maya found a wooden box on the closet shelf. Inside, wrapped in cloth that had once been white but had yellowed with age, a key. Small, brass, old-fashioned. And beneath it, a photograph. 2 women, one middle-aged and one young, standing together in front of a laboratory building. Maya recognized the building immediately. The same structure they'd just left. The older woman was Helena, younger than her final years, but already carrying the intensity Maya saw in the notebooks. The younger woman took Maya's breath away. Her mother, age 20, maybe 22, before Maya's birth, before the estrangement Aunt Claudia had mentioned. Standing with Helena, both smiling with unguarded joy that suggested this photo captured a moment before whatever broke them apart had happened. Maya turned the photo over. Handwriting on the back read, "Maria and me, 1981. Before I chose work over family. Before I lost her. If you're reading this, you're the granddaughter I never met. I'm sorry I failed your mother. I hope my work succeeds where I failed as a parent. The key opens the family archive. Everything I learned is yours now. Use it well. Helena." Teresa read over Maya's shoulder, her voice thick. She knew she'd failed. She documented it for you to find. They returned to the laboratory, Sofia and Lucia, energized by the mystery, solving in a way that made them seem younger than their years. Maya inserted the key into the unmarked door's lock. It turned smoothly, mechanism maintained by dried desert air that preserved rather than corroded. The door opened onto a small room, maybe 10 by 10 feet, lined with shelves holding file boxes and laboratory notebooks. But dominating the center was a workbench holding a safe, modern, and electronic, with a digital display currently dark from lack of power. Baxter stared at the safe. "That's a problem. Without power, we can't open it electronically. These safes have mechanical override, but it requires the combination and a special key." Maya examined the safe, finding manufacturer information. Fortress Series 7, high-security biological storage. The kind of safe designed to protect temperature-sensitive materials and valuable research. She photographed the model number, did a quick search on her phone, found the manufacturer's emergency access protocol. It requires a 9-digit combination and a physical override key usually stored separately. Without both, you're looking at professional safe cracking or cutting, which risks destroying whatever's inside if it's temperature or pressure sensitive. They searched the small room methodically. File boxes contained decades of research documentation, protocols, experimental results, financial records showing how Helena had funded her work through careful investment of her husband's life insurance and her own savings. But no safe combination, no override key. Sofia had been examining the photograph Maya had found. "Mama, look at the back again. The numbers." Maya flipped the photo over. Below Helena's handwritten message were numbers that Maya had assumed were a date. August 15th, 1981, but written differently than typical date format. No slashes, no hyphens except the 2 dividing it into 3 sections. August 15th, 1981. She tried the combination on the safe, knowing it was a long shot. The mechanical dial turned, resisting slightly, decades without use making movement stiff. But it turned. Right to 08, left to 15, right to 1981. The internal mechanism engaged with a click that felt like permission granted across time. But the safe didn't open. Still required the override key. Teresa had been searching the file boxes, pulling documents, looking for anything that might indicate key location. She found Helena's will, handwritten and notarized in 2015. The document was brief, leaving everything to any surviving descendants of my daughter Maria Elena Torres, with a note that my lawyer Robert Baxter knows the location of all relevant materials necessary for my heir to access my life's work. Baxter looked stricken. She never told me about a key. I handled her property taxes and basic legal matters, but she was intensely private about her research. If she left me information about a key, I never found it. Maya felt frustration rising. They were so close. The safe was unlocked mechanically, but still sealed. Whatever Helena had preserved inside remained inaccessible despite solving the combination. Lucia had wheeled to the workbench, examining the safe from her lower vantage point. "Mama, there's something underneath." Maya crouched, looking under the workbench where Lucia pointed. Taped to the underside was a small envelope, yellowed with age, sealed with wax that had cracked but held. Maya peeled it free carefully, opened it, and found a key on a chain alongside a note in Helena's shakiest handwriting, dated January 2nd, just days before her death. "If you made it this far, you're resourceful. The safe contains my final synthesis of NR-47, enough for approximately 30 doses in stable suspension. Also contains complete documentation, dosing protocols, contraindications, everything you need." I tested on myself. Results were inconclusive. I was too old, too damaged. But the molecular analysis is sound. This should work for younger patients, especially children whose neuroplasticity is still active. I'm dying without knowing if I succeeded. But I preserved it for someone who might need it. Use it carefully. Document everything. If it works, share it freely. Don't let pharmaceutical companies weaponize it into profit extraction. This is my gift to the granddaughter I never met and the children she might have. Helena, January 2nd, 2025. Maya's hand shook as she inserted the override key. The safe opened with a pneumatic hiss, equalizing pressure that had been maintained for years through residual seal integrity. Inside, temperature-controlled compartments held vials of clear liquid, each labeled NR-47, synthesis batch 47C, stable suspension, refrigerate below 40 degrees Fahrenheit. 30 vials total, just as Helena had written. Beside them, USB drives labeled Complete Research Archive, synthesis protocols, clinical trial data, self-administered molecular analysis, patent applications prepared but unfiled. And beneath it all, a personal letter addressed simply to my granddaughter. Maya sat on the floor of the archive room, her daughters on either side, Teresa and Baxter standing witness, and read words her grandmother had written knowing death was imminent. "I don't know your name. I don't know your circumstances. I don't know if Maria ever told you about me, or if you discovered my existence only through inheritance lawyers and bureaucratic accidents. But I know you exist because I kept track from a distance, too proud or too cowardly to reach out directly after Maria cut contact. I know she had a daughter in 1989. I know that daughter grew up, had twin daughters of her own in 2014. I know those twins have cerebral palsy because I've been monitoring medical research databases, looking for any cases that might benefit from my work. When I found your daughter's anonymized case study in a medical journal about innovative CP therapy approaches, I recognized the location, the timing, the details that matched what I'd learned about you from careful distance. I'm dying now. Heart giving out the way hearts do when you've lived 89 years with regret as your primary companion. I don't expect forgiveness for choosing work over family, for letting pride and obsession separate me from the daughter I loved. But I can give you what I learned from that obsession. NR-47 works. I tested it on myself over the past decade, documenting everything with scientific rigor despite knowing I was too old for optimal results. My Parkinson's symptoms improved. My cognitive function stabilized despite age-related decline. Motor control partially restored. Not a cure, but significant improvement in neural function. For children with cerebral palsy, especially twins with your daughter's specific presentation, the theoretical outcomes are remarkable. CP is caused by neural damage during development or birth. NR 47 promotes neural pathway formation and repair. In young patients with active neuroplasticity, it should restore significant function. Not overnight, not without risk, but the potential is real. I'm leaving you 30 doses because treatment requires multiple administrations over time. I'm leaving you all my research because you deserve to understand exactly what you're considering. I'm leaving you the choice because I've learned that making choices for others, even with good intentions, destroys relationships. If you use it, document everything. If it works, share the results freely. Don't let this become another pharmaceutical company's profit engine. I've prepared patent applications, but never filed them specifically so this compound remains unprotected by intellectual property. Anyone can synthesize it. Anyone can use it. That's how it should be. I failed as a mother. I failed as a grandmother. But maybe I succeeded as a scientist in a way that will matter to the family I lost. That's my hope as I write this final letter. That my obsession, my failure, my life's work will heal the children of the granddaughter I never had courage to meet. With love I never expressed and regret I can't remediate. Helena Ruiz Torres. The silence after Maya finished reading felt weighted with the accumulated grief of decades. Helena's absence from her daughter's life, Maria's death before reconciliation, the twins born into a legacy they'd never understood. Sofia broke the quiet with the directness of children who cut through emotional complexity to practical questions. Mama, does this mean we could get better? Like really better? Maya looked at the vials, at the research documentation, at her daughter's faces holding hope she desperately wanted to validate but was terrified to promise. I don't know, baby. This is experimental medicine. It hasn't been approved by the FDA. There's no clinical trials. No safety data beyond Grandma Helena testing it on herself. Using it could be dangerous, but not using it is dangerous too. Lucia's observation came with the authority of someone who'd lived through 4 seizures in the past week. My seizures are getting worse. The doctor said so. We can't afford the hospital treatments. What's more dangerous, trying something that might work or doing nothing while things get worse? Teresa, who'd been silent, spoke with the weight of someone who'd raised 4 children and understood risk assessment in ways childless advisors never could. This is not a decision to make right now, in this room with emotions running this high. You need time to review the research, consult with medical professionals if possible, understand exactly what you'd be considering. Baxter cleared his throat. There's also the legal situation to consider. Southwestern Properties is offering $300,000. That money would solve your immediate financial crisis, fund proper medical care through conventional channels. Keeping this property, pursuing experimental treatment based on unpublished research, that's a massive risk. What happens to the research if I sell? Maya asked the question already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it confirmed. The property and all contents transfer to the buyer. They'd almost certainly destroy the laboratory, clear the land for development. The research would be lost unless you removed it first, which might violate sale terms depending on how the contract is written. So my choices are, take the money and lose Helena's work forever, or keep the property and risk everything on treatment that might not work and might actively harm my daughters. Maya felt the trap closing. Both options demanded sacrifices she wasn't sure she could make. There's another possibility. Teresa's voice carried the hesitant quality of someone offering advice that might be rejected. What if you keep the property but don't use the compound yet? Take time to properly evaluate the research. Consult with medical professionals who might help. You understand whether it's legitimate. The property gives you time. The money solves immediate problems but eliminates future options. How do we live here? Maya gestured at the buildings around them. No power, no running water probably. Structures that are barely habitable. I have 2 daughters with significant medical needs. We can't just camp in a laboratory. Baxter considered this. The property taxes are paid through end-of-year thanks to Helena's automatic withdrawal system. Basic utilities could be restored for $500 to $800, maybe less if we negotiate with the utility companies as hardship case. The main house is structurally sound enough for temporary occupation if you're careful about which rooms you use. It's not comfortable, but it's possible. An income? Maya pressed the practical concerns. I lost my jobs in Milwaukee. I have maybe $200 left. Even if we can live here temporarily, we need money for food, medications, gas, everything. Truth or Consequences has a medical clinic that serves rural populations. They need bilingual staff. Baxter's suggestion came with the authority of someone plugged into small-town employment networks. Your Spanish is fluent, according to the forms you filled out. They pay $18 an hour for medical interpreters and administrative support. It's not 3 jobs, but it's something. The twins need schooling. Maya continued listing obstacles, not because she wanted to abandon the option, but because she needed to understand exactly what she'd be committing to. District provides home education services for students with medical needs. I helped another family arrange it last year. Baxter pulled a business card from his wallet. This is Janet Morrison, District Special Education Coordinator. Tell her I referred you. She'll help arrange appropriate services. Maya looked around the archive room, at the vials of NR-47, at the USB drives containing her grandmother's life work, at the notebooks documenting 40 years of obsessive research. She looked at her daughters, at the hope in their faces competing with the exhaustion of living with bodies that didn't cooperate. She looked at Teresa, who'd driven 1,400 miles to help someone who couldn't reciprocate. She looked at Baxter, who was offering solutions instead of just explaining problems. The decision crystallized not as a single choice, but as a series of smaller commitments that accumulated toward direction. Stay in New Mexico. Live in Helena's house temporarily. Restore basic utilities. Take the clinic job. Arrange education for the twins. Review the research thoroughly before making any decisions about using NR-47. Give herself time to understand what Helena had built and whether it represented hope or just another form of grief. We'll stay. The words came out steadier than Maya felt. For now, we'll stay and figure this out. Baxter nodded approval. I'll contact Southwestern Properties and decline their offer. That will anger them, and they'll likely continue pressuring you. But it buys you time to make informed decisions. Teresa squeezed Maya's shoulder. I need to return to Milwaukee in 3 days. But I'll help you get settled first. Basic cleaning, utility restoration, whatever you need to make this livable. The next 72 hours passed in focused activity that left no room for second-guessing. Teresa and Maya cleaned the main house, room by room, discovering that beneath decades of dust and abandonment, Helena had maintained structural integrity even as she'd let aesthetics decay. The kitchen appliances worked once power was restored. The plumbing functioned after purging rust and sediment. The roof kept out weather despite its patched appearance. Baxter arranged utility restoration, pulling local connections that accelerated processes that normally took weeks into services restored within days. By the end of day 2, they had electricity, water, and internet service sufficient for basic function. The twins explored with the careful excitement of children who'd learned not to expect good things to last. They claimed bedrooms on the 2nd floor, Sofia taking the room with morning sun, Lucia choosing the one overlooking the laboratory because she wanted to see where Grandma Helena made the medicine. Maya helped them arrange the minimal furniture Helena had left, supplemented by items Teresa purchased using money she insisted was a gift, not a loan. On the 3rd day, Maya interviewed at the medical clinic. The director, Dr. Sarah Chun, was 45 years old and carried the exhaustion of someone trying to provide health care to underserved populations with inadequate resources. She reviewed Maya's application with efficiency born from necessity rather than rudeness. Your Spanish is truly fluent, not just conversational. My mother was from Mexico City. I grew up bilingual. Maya provided the answer with the confidence of someone who'd code-switched her entire life. We serve a largely Hispanic patient population, many undocumented, most without insurance, all facing language barriers that prevent proper healthcare access. The position pays $18 an hour, 30 hours weekly, because that's all we can afford. Benefits minimal, but the work matters. When can I start? Tomorrow if you're able. We've been short-staffed for 3 months since our last interpreter moved to Albuquerque. Maya started the following day, discovering that medical interpretation required different skills than conversational Spanish. Medical terminology, cultural competency, the ability to translate not just words but meaning across the gulf separating scared patients from overworked providers. She made mistakes, stumbled over technical terms, learned rapidly through necessity. The clinic work brought her into contact with the community in ways that revealed truth or consequences as more complex than tourist brochures suggested. Immigrant families working agricultural jobs, elderly residents subsisting on Social Security, young parents struggling with the same calculations Maya had been performing in Milwaukee, how to survive when income never matched expenses. She met Dr. Ramirez on her 3rd day, a neurologist who visited the clinic twice monthly to see patients who couldn't travel to Las Cruces for specialty care. He was 60-something, Mexican-trained, American-certified, carrying the particular authority of someone who'd fought to practice medicine across borders and bureaucracies. During a break, Maya approached him with the careful hesitation of someone about to ask a favor that might be refused. "Dr. Ramirez, could I ask your opinion about something medical? Personal situation, not clinic-related." His expression suggested he'd heard countless personal medical questions during his career, but he nodded. "Of course. What's the situation?" Maya explained in broad terms. Grandmother who'd been a pharmaceutical researcher. Twin daughters with cerebral palsy. Experimental compound her grandmother had developed but never published or tested beyond herself. The question of whether it was legitimate science or desperate fantasy. Dr. Ramirez listened without interruption, his face revealing nothing until she finished. "What's the compound designation?" "NR 47, neural regeneration focused." His expression shifted to something Maya couldn't quite read. Surprise? Recognition? "I've heard of this. There was a researcher, late 80s I think, who published preliminary work on neural pathway modification using a compound with that designation. The research was promising, but then disappeared from the literature. No follow-up studies, no additional publications. I assumed it had failed in later trials, or the researcher had died." Helena Ruiz Torres. Dr. Ramirez nodded slowly. "Yes, that was the name. She was considered brilliant but unorthodox. The pharmaceutical industry didn't like her approach because she was pursuing cure rather than symptom management. Last I heard, she left mainstream research. I didn't know what happened after. She spent 40 years in a laboratory outside town, continuing the work on her own. She died 2 months ago and left everything to me." Maya felt the weight of the confession. "I have samples of the compound. I have her research documentation. I have 2 daughters whose CP is severe enough that standard treatments aren't sufficient. And I don't know whether using an experimental compound developed by my grandmother in an unlicensed laboratory is courageous or criminally reckless." Dr. Ramirez was quiet for a long moment. "May I see the research documentation? Not to make your decision for you, but to provide professional assessment of whether the science is sound." Maya felt relief flood through her. "Yes, please. I'll bring it tomorrow." That evening, she transferred Helena's USB drives to her laptop and began reading the research archive systematically. The documentation was extensive, running to thousands of pages of experimental protocols, molecular analyses, synthesis procedures, and results. Much of it exceeded Maya's scientific literacy. But even without full comprehension, certain things became clear. Helena had been methodical. Every experiment documented, every variable controlled, every result recorded with the kind of rigor that suggested professional training applied obsessively. The early work showed traditional scientific caution, small steps building toward larger understanding. By the 1990s, the research had accelerated, breakthroughs occurring more frequently as Helena refined her approach. The animal trials, conducted in the 2000s, showed remarkable results. Mice with induced neural damage showed significant functional recovery after NR47 treatment. The effect size was large, statistically significant, reproducible. Helena had documented everything with video evidence, before and after assessments, long-term follow-up extending months and years. The self-administered human trial, Helena testing the compound on herself starting in 2015, was less rigorous by necessity, but still carefully documented. Baseline assessments of her Parkinson's symptoms, motor control, cognitive function. Monthly evaluations showing gradual improvement. Side effects minimal, occasional headaches, temporary dizziness, nothing dangerous. The results weren't miraculous, but they were real. Measurable improvement in neural function despite her age and advanced disease progression. The theoretical application to cerebral palsy was extensively analyzed. Helena had worked through the molecular mechanisms, identifying how NR47 should interact with developing neural tissue, promoting pathway formation and repair. The predictions were specific, testable, grounded in legitimate biochemistry. Maya read until 2 a.m., then continued the next day during lunch break, then resumed after the twins were asleep. 3 days of intensive reading before she felt confident enough to provide Dr. Ramirez with the documentation. He spent a week reviewing everything, consulting with colleagues at University of New Mexico, running searches in medical databases. When he finally scheduled a meeting, his expression carried weight Maya recognized as important conclusions reached after careful deliberation. This is legitimate research. The methodology is sound. The results are consistent with established neuroscience. If this compound works, as documented, it represents a genuine breakthrough in neural regeneration therapy. Maya felt hope rise dangerously. So I should use it for my daughters? Dr. Ramirez raised a hand. I didn't say that. The research is legitimate, but it's also incomplete. There's no pediatric trial data, no safety information for children, no understanding of how developing brains might respond differently than adult or animal models. Using this on your daughters would be human experimentation without institutional review, without safety protocols, without any of the protections medical ethics require. But it's also their best chance, maybe their only chance. Maya heard the desperation in her own voice. Standard CP treatments aren't working for them. The seizures are escalating. We can't afford the hospital care they need. What am I supposed to do? Watch them deteriorate while I wait for research that might never happen? I understand the temptation, but you need to understand the risks. Unknown side effects. Possible adverse reactions. The chance that what worked in animals and in your grandmother doesn't work in children. Or worse, causes harm that standard treatments wouldn't. What would you do if they were your daughters? Dr. Ramirez was silent for a long time. Finally, I don't know. That's the honest answer. The science suggests this could help, but the absence of proper trials means we're flying blind. If you decide to proceed, I can't officially support it, but I can provide monitoring, track their progress, intervene if complications arise. Unofficially, as someone who believes the pharmaceutical industry's profit model prevents treatments like this from ever reaching people who need them, Maya felt the weight of the decision settle fully. This wasn't a choice between obvious right and wrong. This was navigation through uncertainty where every option carried risks and benefits that couldn't be quantified with precision. She went home to the house Helena had built and sat in the library, surrounded by 40 years of obsessive research. She looked at the photograph of Helena and Maria, two women smiling before whatever broke them apart had happened. She thought about her own mother, who died before Maya understood that estrangement was a choice that compounded tragedy. The twins found her there at dinner time. They'd been drawing in their rooms, artwork that showed the laboratory, the house, their new school routine with the home education teacher who visited 3 times weekly. Their lives were stabilizing into something approaching normal despite the abnormality of their situation. "Mama, are you sad?" Sofia recognized the expression Maya wore when grief threatened to overwhelm practical necessity. Just thinking about your great-grandmother, about the choices she made and the things she gave up. Lucia wheeled closer. Are you thinking about the medicine? Whether to give it to us? Maya looked at her daughters, at the intelligence in their eyes despite bodies that limited their physical expression. They deserved honesty. They deserved participation in decisions that affected them most directly. Yes, I'm thinking about that. It might help you, or it might not, or it might cause problems we can't predict. I don't know what the right choice is. What does the science say? Sofia asked the question like the 11-year-old researcher she was becoming, influenced by reading Helena's notebooks. The science says it should work, but science based on experiments isn't the same as knowing what will happen to you specifically. Then we should try it. Lucia's certainty came without hesitation, because staying the same means seizures keep getting worse, and we keep missing school, and you keep working so hard you barely sleep. If there's a chance to get better, even a small chance, we should take it. Sofia nodded agreement. Grandma Helena made this for family she never got to meet. That's us. She made it for us. We should honor that. Maya felt tears threaten, but pushed them back. This is not a decision 11-year-olds should make. This is my responsibility as your mother. But there are bodies. Lucia's logic cut through parental authority. Our brains. Our futures. We should get to choose whether to try something that might help us. The argument was sound. More sound than Maya wanted to acknowledge. Her daughters lived with cerebral palsy every moment. They knew its limitations more intimately than anyone. If they were willing to accept unknown risks for the possibility of improvement, who was she to deny them agency over their own bodies? Let me think about it for a few more days. Research a little more. Talk to Dr. Ramirez again. Then we'll decide together. All three of us. Deal? Deal. The twins spoke simultaneously, then laughed at the synchronization that happened constantly between them. That night, after they'd gone to sleep, Maya returned to the laboratory with a flashlight and her laptop. She'd been avoiding the archive room since finding the NR-47, as though staying away would prevent her from having to choose. But avoidance was just another form of decision, one that defaulted to inaction. She sat at Helena's workbench and opened the file labeled Clinical Trial Data, Self-Administered. The document opened to a video player. Maya clicked play and watched her grandmother appear on screen, years younger than her final days, but already showing signs of the Parkinson's that would eventually kill her. Helena's voice came through the speakers, steady and clear. Day 1 of self-administered trial. Baseline assessment complete. Motor control severely impaired, cognitive function declining, prognosis terminal within 5 to 10 years. Standard treatment provides only symptom management. I'm beginning NR-47 treatment today, April 15, 2015, with full understanding that outcomes are unpredictable. But doing nothing means certain deterioration. And I'd rather fail trying than succeed at giving up. The video ended. Maya clicked to the next file. Day 30. Helena showing marginal improvement in hand tremors. Day 90. Noticeable improvement in motor control and speech clarity. Day 180. Significant improvement across all measured parameters. The progression continued through hundreds of videos, documenting a decade of gradual recovery that defied Parkinson's typical trajectory. The final video was dated December 28, 2024. Helena looked old, exhausted, dying. But her voice was clear, her eyes sharp. This is my final entry. My heart is failing. The neural improvements couldn't prevent that. But I've gained 10 years of functional life I wouldn't have had otherwise. More importantly, I've proven the compound works in humans. I'm leaving this documentation for my heir because she'll need to make the same choice I made. Try something experimental that might work, or accept limitations that certainly won't improve. To my granddaughter, I know you have twin daughters with cerebral palsy. I know you're struggling financially and medically and emotionally. I know that because I've been watching. What would you do if they were your daughters? Dr. Ramirez was silent for a long time. Finally, I don't know. That's the honest answer. The science suggests this could help, but the absence of proper trials means we're flying blind. If you decide to proceed, I can't officially support it, but I can provide monitoring, track their progress, intervene if complications arise. Unofficially, as someone who believes the pharmaceutical industry's profit model prevents treatments like this from ever reaching people who need them. Maya felt the weight of the decision settle fully. This wasn't a choice between obvious right and wrong. This was navigation through uncertainty where every option carried risks and benefits that couldn't be quantified with precision. She went home to the house Helena had built and sat in the library, surrounded by 40 years of obsessive research. She looked at the photograph of Helena and Maria, two women smiling before whatever broke them apart had happened. She thought about her own mother, who died before Maya understood that estrangement was a choice that compounded tragedy. The twins found her there at dinner time. They'd been drawing in their rooms, artwork that showed the laboratory, the house, their new school routine with the home education teacher who visited 3 times weekly. Their lives were stabilizing into something approaching normal despite the abnormality of their situation. "Mama, are you sad?" Sofia recognized the expression Maya wore when grief threatened to overwhelm practical necessity. "Just thinking about your great-grandmother, about the choices she made and the things she gave up." Lucia wheeled closer. "Are you thinking about the medicine? Whether to give it to us?" Maya looked at her daughters, at the intelligence in their eyes despite bodies that limited their physical expression. They deserved honesty. They deserved participation in decisions that affected them most directly. "Yes, I'm thinking about that. It might help you, or it might not. Or it might cause problems we can't predict. I don't know what the right choice is. What does the science say?" Sofia asked the question like the 11-year-old researcher she was becoming, influenced by reading Helena's notebooks. "The science says it should work. But science based on experiments isn't the same as knowing what will happen to you specifically. Then we should try it." Lucia's certainty came without hesitation. "Because staying the same means seizures keep getting worse, and we keep missing school, and you keep working so hard you barely sleep. If there's a chance to get better, even a small chance, we should take it." Sofia nodded agreement. Grandma Helena made this for family she never got to meet. That's us. She made it for us. We should honor that. Maya felt tears threaten, but pushed them back. "This is not a decision 11-year-olds should make. This is my responsibility as your mother. But there are bodies." Lucia's logic cut through parental authority. "Our brains. Our futures. We should get to choose whether to try something that might help us." The argument was sound. More sound than Maya wanted to acknowledge. Her daughters lived with cerebral palsy every moment. They knew its limitations more intimately than anyone. If they were willing to accept unknown risks for the possibility of improvement, who was she to deny them agency over their own bodies? "Let me think about it for a few more days. Research a little more. Talk to Dr. Ramirez again. Then we'll decide together. All 3 of us. Deal?" "Deal." The twins spoke simultaneously, then laughed at the synchronization that happened constantly between them. That night, after they'd gone to sleep, Maya returned to the laboratory with a flashlight and her laptop. She'd been avoiding the archive room since finding the NR-47, as though staying away would prevent her from having to choose. But avoidance was just another form of decision, one that defaulted to inaction. She sat at Helena's workbench and opened the file labeled Clinical Trial Data, Self-Administered. The document opened to a video player. Maya clicked play and watched her grandmother appear on screen, years younger than her final days, but already showing signs of the Parkinson's that would eventually kill her. Helena's voice came through the speakers, steady and clear. Day 1 of self-administered trial. Baseline assessment complete. Motor control severely impaired, cognitive function declining, prognosis terminal within 5 to 10 years. Standard treatment provides only symptom management. I'm beginning NR-47 treatment today, April 15, 2015, with full understanding that outcomes are unpredictable. But doing nothing means certain deterioration. And I'd rather fail trying than succeed at giving up. The video ended. Maya clicked to the next file. Day 30. Helena showing marginal improvement in hand tremors. Day 90. Noticeable improvement in motor control and speech clarity. Day 180. Significant improvement across all measured parameters. The progression continued through hundreds of videos, documenting a decade of gradual recovery that defied Parkinson's typical trajectory. The final video was dated December 28, 2024. Helena looked old, exhausted, dying. But her voice was clear, her eyes sharp. "This is my final entry. My heart is failing. The neural improvements couldn't prevent that. But I've gained 10 years of functional life I wouldn't have had otherwise. More importantly, I've proven the compound works in humans. I'm leaving this documentation for my heir because she'll need to make the same choice I made. Try something experimental that might work, or accept limitations that certainly won't improve. To my granddaughter, I know you have twin daughters with cerebral palsy. I know you're struggling financially and medically and emotionally. I know that because I've been watching. I'm monitoring for adverse reactions." Maya defended herself while acknowledging the truth in Sofia's observation. "We've been taking medications our whole lives. This is just another one." Lucia's pragmatic assessment ignored the experimental nature of what they just ingested. Dr. Ramirez intervened gently. "Let's give them space. If something happens, they'll tell us. Hovering creates stress that can produce symptoms that look like reactions, but are actually anxiety. The next 72 hours established patterns that would define the following months." Maya worked her clinic shifts, arranged for Teresa's daughter Carmen to stay with the twins during those hours, came home to obsessive documentation of everything. The girls' patience with constant monitoring wore thin, but held because they understood the stakes. Day 3 brought the first potential change. Sofia reported that her left hand, typically the more affected by spasticity, felt looser during morning stretches. The observation was subjective, possibly placebo, but Maya documented it carefully. Dr. Ramirez assessed range of motion and found marginal improvement, maybe 5 degrees, within normal variation, but potentially meaningful. Day 7 allowed dose escalation to 40%. The girls took the increased amount without incident. That evening, Lucia reported that her afternoon seizure aura, the warning sensation that typically preceded episodes, had occurred but not progressed to full seizure. Absence of seizure could mean many things, but it was noted, filmed, analyzed. Week 2 brought Maya into conflict with Southwestern Properties for the first time since declining their offer. Daniel Whitmore, the company's regional director and nephew to the company's founder, appeared at the clinic during her shift. He was 50-something, expensive suit, practice smile that suggested negotiations were performance art he'd mastered. "Ms. Torres, I'd like to discuss your decision regarding the property. Our offer expires soon, and I want to ensure you understand the generous terms we're providing." Maya had been translating for a patient, an elderly man with diabetes complications who spoke only Spanish. She finished the medical exchange before addressing Whitmore. "I've declined the offer. The property isn't for sale. I understand emotional attachment to family property, but our development will bring jobs, economic growth, tax revenue to the community. Holding on to deteriorating structures serves no one's interests. The structures are being rehabilitated." Maya kept her voice level despite anger rising. "And they serve my family's interests, which are the only interests that matter regarding property I own." Whitmore's smile tightened. "There are other considerations. Property taxes will increase once the county reassesses based on improvements. Liability insurance for laboratory facilities. Compliance with environmental regulations for any research chemicals stored on site. The costs of maintaining that property will exceed your income quickly. Then I'll address those costs when they arise." "The conversation is over, Mr. Whitmore. I have patients waiting." He left, but his threat hung in the air. Maya asked Dr. Chin about it later, discovering that Whitmore's company had been pressuring multiple property owners, using bureaucratic obstacles to force sales when offers were refused. Week 3 brought undeniable changes. Both girls showed measurable improvements in motor control. Sofia's hand tremors decreased in frequency and severity. Lucia went 11 days without seizures, the longest stretch in 8 months. Their speech clarity improved noticeably, words requiring less effort to form, sentences flowing more naturally. Dr. Ramirez documented everything with growing amazement. "This is beyond placebo effect. These are objective, measurable improvements in neurological function. If this continues, you're witnessing something remarkable. But he also cautioned against premature celebration. We're only 3 weeks in. Long-term effects remain unknown. Improvements could plateau or reverse. Side effects could emerge later. Document everything, but don't assume success until we have months of data. Maya shared the early results with the home education teacher, Janet Morrison, who'd been working with the twins 3 times weekly. Janet had 30 years of experience with special needs students and recognized genuine progress when she saw it. Their concentration has improved dramatically. Sofia's completing math problems that were frustrating her 2 weeks ago. Lucia's reading comprehension is advancing faster than her IEP projected. Whatever you're doing, it's working. Week 4 brought the first complication. Lucia developed severe headaches that lasted 3 days. Dr. Ramirez examined her thoroughly, finding elevated blood pressure and some inflammation markers in her blood work. The treatment was paused while they monitored her condition, Maya terrified that she'd caused harm rather than healing. The headaches resolved after 48 hours off the compound. Blood pressure normalized. When they resumed at reduced dose, no adverse effects returned. Dr. Ramirez's assessment was that they'd escalated too quickly, that Lucia's system needed more gradual introduction to therapeutic levels. Month 2 marked the transition from careful hope to genuine transformation. The improvements became impossible to attribute to anything except the treatment. Sofia, who'd never walked independently, took her first supported steps using a walker. 3 steps, then exhaustion, but 3 steps that represented neural pathways forming where damage had prevented them before. Lucia's seizures stopped completely. 6 weeks without episodes after averaging 4 monthly. The change was dramatic enough that Dr. Ramirez consulted with his neurology colleagues, sharing anonymized case data. Their responses ranged from skepticism to fascination, several requesting more information about the treatment protocol. The twins' personalities emerged more fully as their bodies gained cooperating with their intentions. Sofia revealed dry humor previously masked by speech difficulties. Lucia showed artistic talent, drawing with increasing control and precision. They played with the neighborhood children who'd initially been cautious about interacting with kids in wheelchairs, but now accepted them as simply Sofia and Lucia, not disabled Sofia and disabled Lucia. Maya documented everything obsessively. Hours of video showing progress. Spreadsheets tracking every metric. Written journals describing observations that numbers couldn't capture. The evidence accumulated like proof of miracle. Though Maya understood that scientific rigor demanded, she called it neural regeneration facilitated by targeted pharmaceutical intervention. But felt like miracle anyway. Month 3 brought external attention. Word spread through the medical community about 2 children with cerebral palsy showing unprecedented improvement. Researchers contacted Dr. Ramirez seeking information. Pharmaceutical companies called offering to fund formal studies if he'd share the treatment protocol. Everyone wanted access to whatever was producing these results. Dr. Ramirez refused all offers, honoring the agreement he'd made with Maya to keep the treatment confidential until they had longer-term data. But he also warned her that attention would intensify. You can't hide results this dramatic forever. Eventually, the medical community will demand answers. Month 4 brought the confrontation with Southwestern properties that had been building since Maya's refusal to sell. Daniel Whitmore returned with county officials, claiming environmental violations in the laboratory building, improper storage of hazardous materials, lack of required permits for research facility operation, failure to file appropriate safety documentation. The inspection was clearly coordinated harassment, officials arriving with predetermined conclusions, citing violations for equipment that had been inactive for years. Maya called Baxter, who arrived within 20 minutes and systematically dismantled their claims with the precision of someone who'd spent 40 years protecting clients from bureaucratic overreach. The laboratory hasn't operated commercially in a decade. Dr. Torres had all appropriate permits when she was conducting active research. The equipment is being dismantled and properly disposed of according to regulations. Your manufacturing violations to justify condemnation proceedings. The county inspector, a man named Stevens who clearly owed favors to Whitmore's company, insisted otherwise. The presence of chemical compounds without proper documentation constitutes environmental hazard. The property must be secured until full assessment is completed. What compounds specifically? Baxter pressed. Show me the hazardous materials you've identified. Stevens couldn't, because there weren't any beyond standard laboratory chemicals properly stored and labeled. The inspection was theater designed to create legal pretext for sale. You'll be hearing from the State Environmental Protection Agency, Stevens threatened. They take these matters seriously. So do I. Baxter's response carried the weight of someone prepared for escalated conflict. And they'll find that every regulation has been followed. But they'll also find that this inspection was coordinated with a private company that benefits from property condemnation. That's corruption, Mr. Stevens. I'll be filing formal complaints with multiple oversight agencies. After they left, Baxter explained the strategy to Maya. They're trying to force you into expensive compliance procedures that will drain your resources and make selling attractive. Standard tactic when offers are refused. We fight back by documenting everything and making their harassment more costly than it's worth. Can they succeed? Can they take the property? Not easily, but they can make keeping it expensive and complicated. You need to be prepared for escalating pressure. The pressure came from multiple directions simultaneously. Property tax reassessment arrived with valuation increased 400% based on improvements and restored functionality, translating to taxes of $8,400 annually. Insurance companies refused coverage for the laboratory building, citing liability concerns. The county building department demanded structural inspections costing $3,000. Maya's income from the clinic, supplemented by careful budgeting and the remains of Helena's estate accounts, couldn't cover everything. She took a second job doing medical transcription remotely during evenings. Teresa sent money from Milwaukee that Maya tried to refuse but ultimately accepted. Baxter reduced his legal fees to nearly nothing, calling it pro bono work for a case he believed mattered. The financial pressure threatened constantly to collapse everything, but Maya persisted because the alternative was surrendering her daughter's progress. Sofia was walking with minimal assistance now, her motor control improving daily. Lucia had started physical therapy that actually worked because her neural pathways were forming properly for the first time. The improvements justified every sacrifice. Month 5 brought the breakthrough that transformed everything from personal struggle to potential global impact. Dr. Ramirez presented the anonymized case data at a neurology conference in Denver. The reception was electrifying. Researchers who'd spent careers studying cerebral palsy couldn't explain the documented improvements through any known mechanism. The data suggested something revolutionary. Within 48 hours, Maya's phone rang with calls from Johns Hopkins, Mayo Clinic, Stanford, every major research institution in the country. They wanted to study the twins, replicate the treatment, understand the underlying science. The offers range from research partnerships to outright attempts to purchase Helena's compound and documentation. Maya refused everything until she'd consulted with Baxter and reviewed Helena's final wishes about sharing the research freely. Her grandmother had been explicit. Don't let pharmaceutical companies weaponize this into profit extraction. Make it available to everyone who needs it. Working with Baxter, Maya established the Helena Ruiz Torres Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to developing and distributing NR-47 without patent protection. The remaining vials from Helena's safe were sent to certified laboratories for analysis and potential reproduction. The synthesis protocols were published openly online, available to any researcher or pharmaceutical company that wanted to produce the compound. The decision to release everything freely generated intense debate. Pharmaceutical executives called it irresponsible, claiming proper development required controlled trials and regulatory approval that cost billions. Patient advocacy groups celebrated it as exactly the kind of disruption healthcare needed. Medical ethicists argued, both sides passionately. But Maya held firm to Helena's vision. Her grandmother had developed this specifically to help people, not to generate profit. Making it freely available meant some families would try it without proper medical supervision, might harm themselves through misuse. But restricting access until pharmaceutical companies completed decade-long approval processes meant millions of children would go untreated while corporations negotiated pricing that maximized revenue. The publicity brought its own problems. Southwestern Properties intensified their harassment, filing nuisance lawsuits about property line disputes and zoning violations. Daniel Whitmore appeared on local news claiming Maya was operating an unlicensed medical facility and endangering public health. County officials who'd been neutral became actively hostile under pressure from developers who saw their resort plans threatened by a property owner who wouldn't sell. The twins, now minor celebrities in the neurological research community, handled attention with remarkable maturity. They gave interviews to medical journals, explaining what the treatment felt like, how their bodies were changing, what it meant to have hope after years of accepting limitation. Sofia's description particularly resonated. It's like my brain is finally talking to my muscles in a language they understand. Things I've wanted to do my whole life are becoming possible. Month 6 brought the validation Maya had been both hoping for and dreading. The FDA announced they were fast-tracking review of NR 47 based on the compelling case data and public pressure. Multiple pharmaceutical companies had begun synthesis using Helena's openly published protocols. Clinical trials were being designed at research institutions worldwide. But the FDA also issued warnings about unsupervised use, noting that Maya's daughter's success didn't guarantee safety for all patients. The agency sent inspectors to Truth or Consequences to assess the laboratory and documentation. The inspection took 3 days, resulting in a report acknowledging Helena's research had been conducted with appropriate scientific rigor for private investigation, while emphasizing that this didn't constitute approval for general use. The publicity brought other families to Truth or Consequences, desperate parents of children with cerebral palsy or traumatic brain injuries or degenerative neurological conditions. They came seeking hope, treatment, miracles. Maya met with them all, explaining carefully what NR 47 had done for her daughters while emphasizing the risks and unknowns. Some decided to try it anyway, obtaining synthesized compound from laboratories that began producing it worldwide. Maya connected them with Dr. Ramirez and other sympathetic physicians who agreed to monitor treatment despite its unofficial status. An informal network formed, doctors willing to supervise, families willing to risk, researchers documenting outcomes. Month 7 brought the trial that defined everything that followed. Southwestern Properties, frustrated by failed harassment, filed a lawsuit claiming the property was contaminated by Helena's research and posed environmental hazard requiring remediation that only they could afford. The case was obvious intimidation, but it demanded response. The trial took place in County Courthouse, the same building where Maya had first met Baxter 7 months earlier. She arrived wearing the professional clothes she'd purchased for clinic work, Sofia and Lucia. Beside her in wheelchairs, they were rapidly outgrowing as their motor control improved. The courtroom filled with spectators, local residents curious about the case, medical professionals who'd followed the NR 47 story, reporters from national outlets covering what had become a national story about one woman standing against corporate pressure. Daniel Whitmore sat with his attorneys, expensive suits and confident expressions that suggested they expected easy victory. Judge Patricia Morrison, no relation to the school nurse Maya had dealt with in Milwaukee, presided with reputation for fairness and impatience with nonsense. She'd reviewed the case filings and looked skeptical of Southwestern Properties' claims from the opening statements. The company's attorney, Jameson Reed, presented their case with polished confidence. Environmental testing showed trace amounts of various chemical compounds in the soil around the laboratory building. These compounds, while not immediately dangerous, represented potential long-term contamination that required professional remediation. Ms. Torres lacked the resources to properly address these concerns. The property should be taken through eminent domain for public safety, with fair compensation paid. Baxter's cross-examination dismantled the argument systematically. The contamination was within acceptable limits for any property where research had occurred. The testing had been conducted by a company that worked exclusively for Southwestern Properties. The remediation timeline and costs were vastly inflated. An entire proceeding was transparent attempt to force a sale after repeated offers had been refused. When Maya took the stand, Jameson Reed tried to paint her as reckless, someone operating in a legal medical facility without proper oversight, endangering her own children through experimental treatment, creating public health risk through uncontrolled distribution of an unapproved drug. Ms. Torres, you administered an experimental compound to your daughters without FDA approval, without institutional review board oversight, without any of the safeguards medical ethics require. That's human experimentation, isn't it? Maya met his gaze steadily. My daughters have cerebral palsy. Standard treatments weren't working. My grandmother spent 40 years developing a compound specifically to help conditions like theirs. I reviewed her research thoroughly, consulted with medical professionals, obtained informed consent from my daughters who live with CP every day and understood the risks. I documented everything with scientific rigor. I didn't experiment on my children. I continued research my grandmother couldn't complete. But you're not a doctor. You're not a researcher. You're a medical interpreter who decided she knew better than the FDA, better than the entire medical establishment. I'm a mother. Maya felt anger rise, but controlled it. I'm a mother who watched her daughter suffer, while the medical establishment told me there was nothing more they could do. My grandmother left me tools that could help. Using them wasn't reckless. Refusing to use them while my children deteriorated would have been reckless. And now you're encouraging other families to try this unproven treatment. I'm sharing information my grandmother intended to be shared. I'm connecting families with physicians willing to supervise. I'm honoring my grandmother's wish that her work help people instead of enriching pharmaceutical companies. If that's reckless, then recklessness looks a lot like compassion. Reed tried several more angles, but Maya's testimony held firm. When Baxter questioned her, she explained the improvements in clinical detail. Sofia's motor control advancement, documented with video evidence. Lucia's seizure cessation, confirmed by medical records. The measurable, objective changes that couldn't be attributed to placebo or coincidence. Dr. Ramirez testified about the medical monitoring, the safety protocols, the careful escalation. Other physicians who'd reviewed Helena's research testified about its scientific validity. Parents whose children had begun treatment described desperate circumstances that made experimental intervention their only hope. The trial lasted 3 days. Judge Morrison took 1 day to deliberate before delivering her ruling. This case is not about environmental contamination. The evidence clearly shows that Southwestern Properties' claims are pretextual, manufactured to justify condemnation of property they want for development, but cannot purchase because the owner refuses to sell. That's not how eminent domain works. That's not how our legal system works. Ms. Torres has done something extraordinary. She inherited her grandmother's research and chose to share it freely rather than profit from it. She's helping her daughters and helping other families while pharmaceutical companies plan how to monetize treatments that should be universally available. Whether her approach is perfect is debatable. Whether her intentions are pure is not. The lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice. Southwestern Properties will pay Ms. Torres's legal fees, and I'm issuing a restraining order preventing them from further harassment of this family through spurious legal actions. The courtroom erupted in applause. Maya felt tears threaten, but held them back until she'd left the building. Outside, surrounded by supporters and reporters, she finally let emotion show. My grandmother spent 40 years alone in a laboratory, trying to heal the kind of damage that took her husband and would later affect her granddaughters. She didn't live to see it work, but it's working now. And it's going to keep working because we're not going to let corporations or bureaucrats or anyone else prevent people from accessing treatment that could change their lives. The interview aired nationally that evening. Within 48 hours, Maya received calls from senators, FDA officials, patient advocacy organizations, medical researchers. Everyone wanted to discuss NR47, its implications, the regulatory pathway, the ethical questions it raised about medical access and corporate control of healthcare. Month 8 brought structure to what had been chaos. The Helena Ruiz Torres Foundation, staffed by volunteers and funded by donations that poured in after the trial, established protocols for physicians who wanted to prescribe NR47. They created patient registries to track outcomes. They funded synthesis in laboratories worldwide to ensure supply met demand. They lobbied the FDA for expedited approval while defending families' rights to access treatment immediately rather than waiting years for bureaucratic processes. Sofia celebrated her 12th birthday by walking unassisted for the first time. 20 steps across the living room before exhaustion forced her to sit, but 20 steps that would have been impossible 8 months earlier. The video Maya posted online went viral, shared by millions who saw in Sofia's determined face something that transcended individual triumph. Lucia's art was featured in a local gallery, drawings showing the laboratory, Helena's house, the landscape of truth or consequences rendered with increasing detail as her motor control improved. The exhibition raised $15,000 for the foundation, money that funded treatment for 6 families who couldn't afford the synthesis and monitoring costs. Month 9 brought the FDA's preliminary approval for expanded access programs, allowing physicians to prescribe NR47 under supervision while formal trials continued. The decision was unprecedented, driven by public pressure and compelling evidence that the compound worked. Pharmaceutical companies complained about abbreviated review processes. Patient advocates celebrated access expansion. Within weeks, thousands of children worldwide began treatment. The outcomes varied, success rates around 70%, some patients showing dramatic improvement, while others experienced minimal benefit. Side effects occurred in roughly 15% of cases, mostly manageable, occasionally serious enough to require treatment discontinuation. But the overall picture was clear. NR47 worked for many patients who'd had no other options. Month 10 brought recognition. Medical journals published case series documenting NR47's effects. Helena's research was finally validated in a way she'd never lived to see. Awards were posthumously granted. Her name appeared in textbooks alongside other pioneers who'd advanced neurological medicine against institutional resistance. Maya accepted these honors on her grandmother's behalf, each ceremony an opportunity to emphasize Helena's insistence that the treatment remain freely available. She turned down pharmaceutical companies' offers to purchase the foundation, refused attempts to patent NR47 synthesis despite lawyers explaining she could become wealthy. Helena had chosen healing over profit. Maya would honor that choice. Month 11 brought Southwestern Properties' final assault. Unable to purchase or condemn the property legally, they attempted to buy surrounding land and zone it for industrial use that would make residential occupation untenable. The plan was transparent spite, revenge against someone who'd refused to be bullied. The community responded by attending zoning hearings en masse, opposing the development, voting out county commissioners who'd supported it. Truth or consequences had watched Maya fight for her daughter's and her grandmother's legacy. They weren't going to let developers win through procedural manipulation what they'd lost in court. The zoning proposal failed. Daniel Whitmore resigned from Southwestern Properties amid investigations into his coordination with county officials. The company abandoned their truth or consequences development plans entirely, focusing instead on other regions where property owners proved more cooperative. Year 1 concluded with changes so profound they felt like different lives entirely. Sofia walked independently now, her gait slightly uneven but functional, her wheelchair relegated to backup for when fatigue struck. Lucia had been seizure-free for 10 months, her motor control sufficient that she was learning to paint with traditional brushes rather than adaptive equipment. The twins attended regular school now, mainstreamed into 7th grade with minimal accommodations. They had friends, interests, futures that extended beyond managing their condition. Sofia talked about becoming a doctor. Lucia wanted to study neuroscience and continue her grandmother's work. Maya had left the clinic job to work full-time at the foundation, coordinating research, supporting families, honoring Helena's legacy by ensuring NR 47 reached everyone who needed it. The work paid enough to live comfortably, though nothing like the wealth pharmaceutical companies had offered for exclusive rights. The house had been fully restored, the laboratory converted into a research library and museum dedicated to Helena's work. Visitors came from around the world to see where NR 47 had been developed, to understand the story of one woman's 40-year obsession that had finally borne fruit in her granddaughter's recovery. On the anniversary of first reading Baxter's letter about the inheritance, Maya stood in Helena's study, surrounded by the notebooks that documented her grandmother's journey. Sofia and Lucia were downstairs, arguing about homework with the normal sibling dynamics that cerebral palsy had previously complicated. Their voices carried through the house, healthy and strong and full of futures they were building. Maya opened the final notebook, the one from 2025, and read Helena's last entry again. Perhaps someday someone will find this and finish what I couldn't. Someone had found it. Someone had finished it. And now thousands of families worldwide were benefiting from research that had nearly been lost, from compounds that pharmaceutical companies would have locked behind patents, from one woman's refusal to accept that profit mattered more than healing. Maya pulled out a fresh notebook and began writing her own entry, documenting the first year of NR 47's public use, recording outcomes and observations that future researchers would need. The work continued because Helena had taught her that some things mattered more than money or comfort or conventional success. Family mattered. Healing mattered. Fighting for what was right, even when the fight seemed impossible, mattered. These were the inheritances that transcended property and wealth, the legacies that outlived their creators by changing the world one healed child at a time. Outside, New Mexico's sunset painted the desert in shades of amber and gold. The laboratory stood solid and purposeful beside the house Helena had built. The twins' laughter echoed from downstairs, sound of children who'd been given futures they shouldn't have had. And in the study where Helena had spent 40 years refusing to give up, her granddaughter wrote the continuing story of research that had finally reached the people it was meant to help. The inheritance hadn't been property or money. It had been purpose, determination, and the knowledge that ordinary people could achieve extraordinary things when they refused to accept that some problems were unsolvable. Helena had proven that. Maya had continued it. Sofia and Lucia embodied it. And now, through the foundation and the thousands of families it served, the legacy would extend infinitely forward, healing children who would never know Helena's name, but would live fuller lives because one woman had chosen obsession over comfort, healing over profit, hope over resignation. The final words Maya wrote that evening summarized everything the year had taught. Some legacies are measured in money. Others are measured in lives changed. My grandmother left me both options. I chose the one she would have wanted. And I'd make that choice again every single day, because what we've built here matters more than wealth. It matters more than recognition. It matters because it helps people who need help, because it honors someone who deserved honor, because it proves that love and determination can heal wounds that institutions claimed were permanent. She closed the notebook and went downstairs to join her daughters for dinner in the home that had waited decades to be properly claimed, properly honored, properly transformed into the healing place Helena had always intended it to be. The work would continue. Challenges would arise. But for tonight, in this moment, Maya let herself simply feel gratitude for the inheritance that had seemed like burden but proved to be blessing, for the grandmother she'd never met but had come to love through her work, for daughters who'd been given their lives back through one woman's refusal to accept that some diseases couldn't be cured. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.